Hey, it's Nikki, and today's episode is a special series called In the Loop, Communicating for Maximum Leadership Impact with my friends from Borshoff. I am a huge fan of the work Borshoff does to advance internal communication, and so happy that they have joined Gut Plus Science for a special series. Get ready for internal communication inspiration. There's so many nuggets of wisdom here.
Hey everyone, welcome to In the Loop, Communicating for Maximum Leadership Impact. I'm Katherine Coble, your host, and I'm really excited to bring you this monthly series that explores how you, as a leader, can become a better communicator. Thanks for listening. Let's get started. Every day, leaders write. You may not think of yourself as a writer, but the reality is, if you run a company or you hold really any sort of leadership position, you write. You write emails, proposals, responses. You write social media posts, texts, and speeches, and just all sorts of things. And some of those are much more effective than others. So how can you write in a way that gets the results that you're looking for? Well, first, you have to understand your reader, and you have to be sure that you're writing for them and not for you. Today, I want to share some insights on how to be more effective in your written communication. You know, as a leader, you're spending a lot of time coaching, persuading people, negotiating, making all sorts of decisions. And in each of those cases, you have to communicate well if you want to get the results that you really, really want. Many of these activities are taking place in the form of verbal interactions, but a big part of leadership is communicating through some form of writing. It's become even more common today when so many of us are working in hybrid or remote locations. There's a lot more asynchronous communication going on than there used to be, and most of that is in written form. Now, for those of you who aren't sure what that means, asynchronous is just the idea that I communicate with you when it's convenient for me, and you consume the message when it's convenient for you. So we're not necessarily doing it in real time. I write it today, but maybe you read it tomorrow or the next day. So with all the written communication that's going on inside of our organizations, we need to be sure that we're connecting our words and communicating effectively and clearly. Now, a recent study by a group called Axios HQ, they study internal communications practices. It found that almost half of all leaders say that the toughest step they take to keeping their organization aligned is writing in a concise and engaging way that people will actually read. They say that people are flooded with information every day, and boy, are they right. The average person in a work setting receives about 121 emails a day. You know, it makes me think of something I heard a leader say once. We are drowning in information, but we're starving for context. Meaning, the information isn't lacking, but making it relevant and putting it in the context of the person consuming it, that's where the real magic happens. If you're not sharing information in context, you just really aren't communicating in a way that's going to get you results. So today I want to focus on how we can communicate to get results. Well, why is it that written communication isn't as effective as it could be? Well, we often think it might be because the leader is just using too much jargon, or maybe they're just being too formal in their writing style. Maybe the leader is writing too long of a message or just using a lot of big words. All of those things could be true, and we'll talk about some ways to fix those things. But first, we have to be sure we're starting with the who. Now, before any leader ever starts to write a communication to their team, they must first ask the question, who am I writing for? Now, that may seem obvious. The leader may say, well, I'm writing for my employees, of course. But let's just slow down a minute and think that through. Here's an example. Let's say that you as a leader want to encourage your employees to volunteer with an organization that the company is supporting. You could share all the great things that the organization is doing, the long history that your company has with the organization, and all the details about the event and the needs that your team could meet by volunteering. And these details are important, and they're likely to appeal to some of the employees that you're communicating with. But will it be enough to get them to take the actual action that you're looking for? Stop and think from the employee's perspective. What is it that they connect with? Not what you want to tell them, not what you want them to know, but what they want to know. They're likely not the same thing. First and foremost, employees want to know what the news or information that you're sharing means for them, putting it all in the context of how it impacts them, how it helps them, or what they can expect from the experience. Now, most leaders send what they think are essential communications at least weekly, and they spend a lot of time doing it. Some say between 3 and 10 or more hours preparing those communications. So we know that there's not a lack of communication, and we know that written communication is a big part of that. But what are the leaders communicating, and what do employees think is important to know? Well, in the Axios HQ study I mentioned earlier, employees say the top 2 things that they need are, number 1, operational changes like policy and process updates that help them do their job well. And number 2, they want to understand the organizational goals, the new plans and initiatives, so that they know how their work contributes to a bigger goal. But in the study, leaders ranked those 2 items among the lowest that they thought were essential. And to make matters worse, employees said that the 2 things they thought were the least important were the things they actually heard about the most when their leaders communicated. Those were things like business updates and just macro news and information. Clearly, we have a misalignment between what leaders think is important and what employees think is important. Before we can ever focus on how we write, WRITE, our messages, we have to make sure we're communicating about the right, RIGHT, things. Now, to understand what employees want to know, we should just ask them, survey them. Make sure that you're asking for feedback and inviting questions. Whenever there's a 2-way dialogue, you're much more likely to understand what your employees really want to hear and how they best need to hear it. So, when we know what to communicate to employees, how can we be sure to do it effectively, especially when we're writing the communication? Well, better writing really comes down to what I think are just 3 big ideas. Make it relevant, make it easy, and make it sticky. Now, I recently read a book called Writing for Busy Readers. I'll include a link to it in the show notes. The book offered some really great tips on making business writing better so that you can get better results. Now, I won't be able to cover everything in the book here today. The authors had 6 core principles for better writing. But as I read it, the points boiled down to these 3 big ideas for me. So I'll share those highlights with you in my own words. First, make your writing relevant. Now, I mentioned earlier that employees most want to understand operational updates that impact their jobs, and they also want to understand operational goals so that they know they're on track and that they're making a difference with their work. Giving them context helps with a lot of this, that is, giving them the why, but it's not enough. We have to specifically position the information we're sharing in a way that is connected to them. Now, every time you put together a written communication, ask yourself if you are answering the questions that they will have when they read your announcement. Let's go back to the example I opened with. You want to enlist volunteers for a community event that your company is supporting. Instead of positioning the event as an opportunity to support a local organization, think about the value the individual employee will get and put that at the front and center of your message. As an example, a traditional subject line on an email that you might send out about this event might read something like this: Sign up today to volunteer with the food bank. Well, that will probably get some of your employees engaged. But what if instead you said something like this: Want to help feed hungry families next Friday afternoon? By shaping this into a question and focusing on the value it would bring to the employee, you're making the topic more relevant to the individual who's reading it. Using the question makes it feel more personal and specific. The focus on the people who benefit feels warm and helpful. And the specific time frame that you give shows the reader that this is an event that will take the reader out of the regular work environment for a good cause on a Friday afternoon. That sounds pretty attractive to me. So, tip number 1, make it relevant. Make your writing more relevant to the specific person or the group of people that you're writing to, and you will be much more likely to get the result that you're looking for. Let's move on to tip number 2, make it easy. Now, this tip is so critical. Making your writing easy to read sounds like a given, but how many times have we all received an email from a coworker or a client or someone else and just literally had to put the message aside because it was too overwhelming to deal with? I just had this happen to me this past week. A contact sent me an email asking some questions and requesting some changes to a scope of work document, and I just could not even process it. There were questions within the questions, ideas within the ideas, and lots of jargon. I'm talking way too much jargon. Now, in business communication, we often think it's okay to use jargon because it's just part of the work environment or the industry that we operate in. Everyone knows what these terms mean, so I don't need to define them. But the reality is that even if everyone knows what they mean, jargon just desensitizes us to common sense, and it keeps us from taking actual action. It makes things overly complicated, and we just lose sight of what the writer is asking us to do if we have to wade through a bunch of jargon. Now, in the book I mentioned earlier, Writing for Busy Readers, the authors share some stories and some surveys that they've done, and they back all of this up. They say that busy readers are much more likely to prioritize messages that they think can be dealt with easily and quickly, which means that they set aside the difficult and time-consuming requests. And you know what happens when we set things aside? We are much less likely to return to those things and to complete the tasks. So, how can you make your writing easier for the reader? I mean, besides just eliminating jargon, well, just remember the saying, less is more. Tighten up your writing. Write your message, then go back and edit it. Share it with someone else. Force yourself to condense the message by at least a third or a half. And you can do this in several ways. First, you can just use fewer words. You can use simpler words. For example, instead of saying, in the future, just say soon. Instead of saying, with the exception of, just say except. Small changes like this will help make your writing clearer and tighter. There's a whole list of these in the book if you decide to read the book. But it's not just the words that we're using or maybe that we're not using. Your writing can actually be clearer if you include fewer ideas as well. Eliminate the extra ideas that just really aren't critical to your message. This is going to help you emphasize the things that are critical. Sometimes we feel like we have to start with casual chit-chat at the beginning of our message, and this may feel like we're connecting with people before we go right into our ask, but really, we're just adding words and ideas that most readers skim over. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go right in for the kill immediately with no greeting at all. That would feel way too transactional. I am just suggesting that you be intentional and concise, knowing that this is not where people are going to truly connect with your message. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. Let's say you're getting ready to ask your employees to participate in a culture survey. Here is what a typical opening paragraph might look like. Thank you in advance for participating in this year's culture survey. We know you have a lot of other pressing activities, but your feedback will help us ensure that we're creating programs and policies that our employees value. We want to hear from you. Okay, that's not terrible, but the reality is employees aren't even really going to read that. Instead, keep it friendly and simple. You could say something like this. Thank you for completing this 10-minute culture survey. Your feedback will help us improve our employee offerings. Okay. Well, it's simple, it's still very friendly, and it allows the reader to get right into the action step. So let's dive into the last point here, and possibly the most important one of all. Anytime you can, you want to make sure that your written communication is sticky. Now, by sticky, I mean that we want to make it obvious what action we're looking for. We want to make it almost irresistible so that the reader is compelled to act right in that moment. Remember, people set aside difficult tasks, and once they do that, they are much less likely to come back. To make your written communication more sticky, the most important thing you can do is limit what you ask for. Make fewer requests of your reader. If you want the reader to answer a question, but also to find a document and send it to you, and then schedule a meeting with another colleague, you've probably asked for too many things in one communication. What usually happens is that they respond right away with the answer to the question because that was simple and easily available for them to give you. They may even schedule the meeting with the colleague, but they'll probably forget to send you the document because that would have required that they be on their laptop instead of their phone, which is what they were using to answer your question, and it's just a whole thing. Well, we see this play out in our personal lives too, even when we think we're just asking a few simple questions. I can remember a number of times when I've texted a friend with 2 or 3 questions, and when she responds, I only get the answer to one of those questions. We all get distracted. We all get derailed. We think we're better multitaskers than we actually are. If we can limit our requests in the moment, we're much more likely to get them answered. We can also make it easier for the message to stick with our reader if we can use some sort of formatting that helps the reader navigate our message. Things like bullet points, bold text, or other types of formatting. These are visual prompts that allow the reader to skim to the action step and refer to the other parts of the message for clarification as needed. Let's just be real. Everybody skims. It's really no secret. Now, you don't want to go overboard with your formatting, but you do want to use it wisely because it will help the reader track through the message in a way that's much more likely to get results. Now, it's difficult for you to really see what I'm talking about through this podcast, so I wrote a blog sharing these same 3 points and included some visual samples so that you can see how these principles can really work. So check that out. It's linked in the show notes. Also, one of the coolest things I found in reading the book Writing for Busy Readers was an AI tool that the authors created. I've linked to the website in the show notes so that you can access it too. It's a very simple tool built on ChatGPT. Basically, what you do is you put an email that you wrote into the box on the left and you hit submit, and the tool will edit your email into a simpler, more reader-focused message on the right. I tried this with a message I wrote to a client that was about 200 words long. The tool edited the message into an 80-word message that had all the right context, but it was much clearer in getting to my ask. It was truly amazing. Now, as I wrap up, I want to encourage you. Even if you don't see yourself as a writer, you are. If you're a leader, you're a writer. And if you want to have real impact as a leader, you have to refine your writing to really connect with your team. So go out, keep your team in the loop through clear and compelling communication, and watch your impact grow. Thanks for listening.
We just left the world a little bit better. Now, go do something with it.